Alrighty. We're just going to be discussing the parking lot scuffle. So for the group here, question number one. Why do you believe that the conflict between Tim and Jay escalated to physical violence?
So I think it escalated to physical violence because both of them felt like they were in the right, and neither of them were able to admit that they were at fault. They couldn't take responsibility for any wrongdoing. Also, Tim might have thought Jay was trying to leave the scene, and that's why it escalated to physical violence.
Okay.
Yep.
You want to add to that one, Carlos?
Yeah, I think the reason why is because, I mean, in essence, you have someone running towards you, wanting to get into a physical altercation, not wanting to hear you out. Or when you get into that heated, I'm angry mentality, you really don't care what the other person has to say. You just know that your property is damaged and somebody's got to pay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that came down and boiled down to, hand to hand.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it was a complete accident, once the aggressor starts throwing punches, what is the other one supposed to do? Stand there and take them?
Yeah, right. I would agree. I think those are two very good points. To kind of reinforce that, I think the biggest thing for me, in my opinion, would have been the uncontrolled escalation. Exactly like you said, your property is damaged, and so you're just going to go in hot, and you don't really care, what that other person has to say, because at the end of the day, your property is damaged, and you just want someone to be able to cover that cost for you. So I'd agree with you, Carlos, and then what Mel said in regards to, nobody wanted to take responsibility. Everybody wanted to put the blame on someone else there. So ultimately, if they would have internalized that problem, they may not have gotten in a scuffle in the parking lot, in my opinion there. Any last-minute comments on that question, or can we jump to number two?
One other thing is Tim previously in his background, maybe in other conflicts he's seen, maybe violence was the solution. So maybe that's why he resorted to violence. But other than that, I think that's it for me.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Tim starts right off the bat with saying, "What's your problem? What the hell did you do to my Honda?" Like, if he would have approached and been like, "Hey, man, are you okay? Like, I saw you hit my car. Like, are you okay?" And then talk about the property maybe second. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten in a fist fight there. In regards to question number two, how might anxiety have played a role in this conflict?
So since neither of their needs were being satisfied, there was a tension built up between them. And basically, that tension created unneeded psychic energy, which then neither of them were able to come to an agreement, or at least without putting all the blame on one person. They also didn't see each other's needs as legitimate. They kind of just brushed it off whenever one mentioned their problem or a solution that they thought would work.
Okay.
I think that the anxiety for Jay comes from where it says that he had a couple things on his mind. Who's to say what was on his mind? He's coming in like any other day, drives, pulls into his parking spot with no expectation of anything or anyone being there. Come to find out, moped there at the last minute. So it kind of becomes like a complacency type of thing. He's so used to that Monday through Friday routine, come in, park in your own spot, there you go. But I think the anxiety comes from that, from him having, I guess, his mind preoccupied with other stuff, which that's what starts the conflict in essence, because no matter what, nothing would have happened if he was paying attention to his driving. So even though he was the receiving of the aggression, if he would have been paying attention, everything would have been okay.
Mhm.
That's a great point. Absolutely, I would agree to what both of you guys had to say. The anxiety that Jay had coming into the event was kind of overwhelming, and he had that internal noise that he couldn't really focus on what he was doing. So I'd agree. You know, he was just in his normal routine. He didn't expect to see anything there. So once you hit something, your anxiety is gonna multiply on top of what you already have been experiencing. So that probably led to the quick escalation, was essentially how much anxiety both first Jay felt to initiate, and then Tim didn't really help either. He just came in with his anxiety as well.
Mhm.
Any last minute comments on that one, or are we looking good for number 3?
Yeah, I'm good to go to number 3.
Okay, cool. So question number 3, what was the emotional was the emotional contagion inevitable? Why or why not?
So I think it's kind of hard to determine whether or not it was inevitable. Both of them were experiencing a flood of emotions, and it just depends on what the contagious emotion would have been. I mean, if it was anything other than rage or anger, say both of them had gone in with a calm mind, then it wouldn't have escalated. But I do think that emotional contagion was inevitable, regardless of the emotion.
Yes, I think it was inevitable. However, I'm going to show a little disagreement in that, because if someone's coming at you, I get it. You know, it's like what is it, fight or flight or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I believe that even though someone's coming at you, if the emotional contagion was not present, there would have been a chance for some sort of communication to be like, hey, stop, hey man, it was an accident. Look, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But because Jay was going with what the aggressor was coming at him, he had no choice but to mimic it. He had no choice but to retaliate in the same manner that he was being approached in. So could there have been a chance of, hey, I need to stop this because I'm about to get punched in the face? Or are we going to essentially kind of throw down back and forth?
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you. Absolutely. I think it is inevitable that emotional contagion was in place, because it gets heated. At the end of the day, something bad happened, and both of these people are going to be overwhelmed. So if one person shows anger, that other person's probably going to be like, misunderstanding the situation. He's probably going to retaliate with angry feelings of his own. So in regards to the sub question there about avoiding the escalation, I think it's very possible that they avoid the escalation. Ultimately, I mentioned this before, but if we would have if this conversation would have started with maybe a personal comment like, hey, I saw you run into my vehicle, I just want to make sure that you're okay though. And then from there, the other person may experience emotional contagion in a positive manner. They sense that empathy from the other person, so they may try to portray empathy right back, and ultimately, for me, that's maybe how you could have avoided further escalation out of anger there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. Normally when an accident happens, the common courtesy is to say, are you okay? Or is everything okay? Can I help with anything?
Yeah.
But he, I forgot the aggressor's name, Tim.
Yeah.
He just, came running.
Yeah.
But if maybe he would have thought a little bit and said, hey, even though, I mean, your reaction is to get angry. That's my bike. You knock over my bike, we're having issues.
Yeah.
But, I mean, especially if it's someone that you work with, because that's what it said, right? The co-worker or something?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, they work in the same office.
Yeah, they work in the same office. So it's like, it should have been more of like a benefit of the doubt. Did you do it on purpose or did you not do it on purpose? So I think that should have been present the fact of like, hey, I'm gonna give him benefit of the doubt. It was
Yep.
probably an accident. Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been the better way to approach that. Absolutely. Especially knowing that, these guys work together. They're going to have to see each other again. I know that I wouldn't want to start a conflict like that with someone that I'm going to see 5 days out of the week. You spend more time with people at work than sometimes with your own family. So
Yep.
I'd agree with you guys. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
Well, and then one more
sorry.
thing on that. I think
Yeah.
if Jay would have felt guilty for it and
Mhm.
admitted that he hit his bike and was willing to at least exchange insurance information, then I feel like some of the anger would have been dissipated quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. We're kind of blaming it a lot on Tim, but Jay definitely had a couple of missteps here and there that further escalate the situation. So I'm glad you bring that up because I would agree with you absolutely there. For question number 4 here, which cultural models of conflict does Tim's behavior most resemble? What standards concerning how conflict should be handled does this imply? What about Jay's behavior?
Okay, so I felt that Tim's behavior mostly resembled the confrontational model. Like he believes the conflict should be handled aggressively in pursuit of his own goal. He has absolutely no emphasis on relationship preservation. He attempted to negotiate the conflict in a way where he would benefit. And for Jay's behavior, I think it seems more regulative, where he believes that the scooter shouldn't have been parked in that spot. So he felt like it was violating a rule. He was frustrated, but he wasn't as emotional as Tim. He attempted to involve a third party, like a parking attendant, when he attempted to step away. Other than that, what do you guys think?
I'm gonna go with confrontational all the way because if that wasn't the case, there would not be no physical altercation present.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to say that there was harmony in the conflict because they were exchanging fists. So I can't really say that. I can't say that there's no harmony in that. And regulative, I just don't see it. It says here, like I'll just give you an example. It says to settling conflict through application of principles. I don't think any of that was present or happened. It was codes, rules, and laws. No, nobody followed them. Nobody said we're at work. Because potentially speaking, you have 2 people that can get fired. So now you're getting into an altercation at work, which can lead to termination. So if that were the case, it would have been more thoughtful, like, oh my God, I got to take care of my job. I'm pissed. I'm mad at you. You knocked over my moped, but I don't want to lose my job. So I don't think that was present at all. I just think it was straight to the confrontational model.
I would agree with Carlos because in my opinion, it does sound confrontational as well. Tim is a little bit less, ultimately, which is, yeah. Oh, excuse me. Jay is a little bit less confrontational than Tim is, but ultimately, I think they both went through that model. The reason I say that is because Jay states as his second comment, what was it doing parked there? And, we're just reading this off of the page, but if we think about how someone would say that in real life, I know that if I were Jay, I'd probably be saying that in a really sarcastic, snarky, like escalated manner, like, what is your bike doing there? I'd be full of emotion there. So I think there's a little bit of it's confrontational for both. Tim a little bit more exaggerated than Jay, but ultimately both of them do, convey that.
Well, the only reason I had mentioned the regulative is because of the statement that why was it parked there? He felt like it was an implied rule that the moped shouldn't be parked in a regular spot.
That's a good point too. Right. And it depends on like the tone of voice. I thought about it in a different way than you did. And
Mhm.
ultimately, it's going to come down to the tone of voice. You know, how did that person convey that message? Because you read it and you see one thing, I read it and I see another thing. So that'd be very interesting to see what we thought about if we actually had seen
Mhm.
this in person and we were able to read body language. We may, you know, find that we agree with one another a little bit more on that one.
I mean, that is true. I mean, once Mel said that, that kind of makes me think about like the idea of, you know what, it is true. If he says, "Why are you parked here?" He's clearly trying to, you know, not be confrontational, but trying to state that, you know, you're here when you're not supposed to be. And then, I mean, everything went downhill after that. But I think the attempt was made on Jake's behalf.
Yeah. Let's see. For question number 5 here, what, if anything, could Jay have done to forestall the impact of expectancy violation on the conflict?
Okay, so Jay could have admitted he was wrong and offered to change his or exchange his insurance information, and he could have reacted better to Tim's emotional responses. Mm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to agree with that one too because he could have. I'm putting this entire situation on Jay's shoulders.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a little strong, but I'm gonna stick to it. And let me say why. When guy comes out angry, he could have said like, "Hey, you know, I'm sorry," because even though he's in his spot, there's a boundary that was crossed because now there's property damage.
Mhm.
So even though you're sitting in somebody's parking space, it's like one of those things was like, dude, you can talk to me, but don't touch me.
Mhm.
In essence, that's kind of what happened with the property. It's in his spot, but nonetheless shouldn't have touched it. And in doing so, he could have been like, "Hey man, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have been here. But I know that this is an accident, you know."
Yep. I would agree there. It's for me, it's the second statement that Jay says. If he would have maybe reworded what he was thinking in a different manner and said, "Hey, I know I hit your car. You know, I hit your moped. Let's talk this through because I want to be able to work with you and I want to find a solution that's going to work for both of us. You know, we can exchange insurance or maybe I just cover that in cash. But ultimately, the way that he responded to me kind of helped escalate the situation. But if he would have lowered that expectancy of these guys are just wanting to fight, and he would have kind of given into it a little bit more, it may not have gotten physical.
Mhm.
So for question number 6 here, what might Jay and or Tim have done to sort out their mistaken attributions from actual competitive intentions?
I guess one of the big things is they could have taken into account the emotional impact of the accident on each other. That way, they kind of left their judgments before immediately judging a person based on how they initiated the conflict.
I think so too. I think that they are both mature adults that this should have been taken care of in a whole different manner instead of going straight from 0 to 100.
Mm-hmm.
So it for sure could have been prevented, but the emotions got too strong.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they both wanted the other person to kind of admit that they were responsible instead of kind of pointing fingers. It's possible that they internalize the problem and both of them say, you know, Jay admit that, you know, he probably should have been paying a little bit more attention. Tim admitting that he shouldn't have been parked in that parking lot. If they would have established both of their wrongdoings, that probably could have led to an easier conversation to how to fix this. But they both wanted to point the finger at each other, and they both wanted the other person to take responsibility. instead of internalizing that and saying, hey, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe I could do something different next time to avoid this in the future. So I think, again, it's the statements. If they would have just said something different or said it in a different manner, they could have easily separated the two, what we have here in regards to competitive intentions and mistaken attributions. And then there's a sub question here for our last question. Could the damage done by attribution processes in this conflict have been limited or counteracted?
Repeat the question.
Yep, my apologies there. Could the damage done by is that attribution? Attribution? Excuse me, thank you. Could the damage done by attribution processes in this conflict have been limited or counteracted?
I think they could have been limited. I mean, if each one was less willing to find excuses for their own behavior, then that would have definitely limited it. And then I guess at the point of escalation where it actually got to violence, Tim could have realized that Jay was walking away to find a parking attendant instead of Jay's goal being some sort of bad intention towards Tim. They both could have tried to understand each other's behavior and adapted properly to the situation.
I'm going to go with both. Do I have to pick one? I'm going to go with both.
Yeah, you don't have to pick one.
I think I'm going to go with both because can it be limited? Yes. I mean, everything, I think there's a limit to everything. So there's for sure a limit on this escalation of force in essence. But could there have been counteracting? Yes. If you are running at me, I'm going to counteract you with my hands up saying, hey, stop. So I think that there could have been some counter-reacting to emotions. You're coming at me super angry. I'm going to be apologetic because I know I messed up by hitting you moped.
Yeah. Those are both great points there. The biggest thing for me there is it could have been limited, but more importantly, it could have been counteracted. When Jay puts his hands on when Tim puts his hands on Jay could have, said it's already a really escalated situation, which is why it's difficult for me to say this, but he could have maybe, instead of saying, let go of me, you're screwed, I'm calling the police, he could have explained why he was walking away. Hey man, let go of me. There's a attendant right over there. We're going to go get them to speak to us about this. And for me, that kind of, it's difficult for me to say that just because I feel like I'm reaching, because it's already a really escalated situation, So at that point, Tim and Jay, they're probably not going to say that, but the actions could have been counteracted if that was explained in the situation there. But that was a pretty good first meeting. Then I think